A Place Near the Front is a coming-of-age story of a young man from the Caribbean island of Trinidad who arrives at the shores of the U.S. as a merchant seaman in the early 1900s and journeys through the streets of Harlem and the Howard University halls of learning to the trenches of World War I in search of his place in the promised land of America. Born in San Fernando, a quaint and hilly town in the south of Trinidad, with a view of Venezuela 10 miles beyond the Gulf of Paria, young William Herbert dreams of big things and how he can make his mark on the world. His sleepy hometown, still without paved streets or electricity, is experiencing tough times. Like the rest of the country, it is suffering from the collapse of Trinidad's sugar industry, which is no longer able to compete with world markets without the free labor lost when slavery was banned in 1839. Its few small crops and exports are not enough to support the economy, and oil is not yet being exported from the island. Already thinking about expanding his world to find work, young William, known to his family and friends by his middle name Gordon, begins visiting the docks and soon becomes a merchant seaman. After several trips to the U.S. aboard the SS Mariposa, he jumps ship to seek his fortune in America. He loves the culture and excitement of New York's Harlem, but quickly realizes that he must improve on his Trinidad grade school education if he intends to make anything of himself in America. He enrolls in Howard Academy, a high school operated by the university in the early 1900s to prepare promising students for college. As he completes his final year, America enters World War I. In all past U.S. wars and conflicts, black men had served as both volunteers and conscripts, but always in menial jobs that white soldiers did not wish to perform, as ammunition handlers, stevedores, and on work gangs that recovered unexploded ordnance from the battlefields and burying the dead. Up to that time, black soldiers had always been commanded by white officers. In this war, however, two colored infantry divisions had been formed, and for the first time in U.S. military history, black soldiers would be commanded by black troops. Except for a few white senior commanders, everyone in the two divisions would be black. Intrigued with the possibility of serving as an officer and leading a unit of radio men in a technology he had learned as a merchant seaman, Gordon completes an Army radio course during his final months at Howard and leaves for Europe with the 92nd Infantry Division as a second lieutenant in its Signal Corps radio unit. But he and other black officers quickly realized that President Wilson, an avowed racist who instituted segregation among federal government workers when he took office in 1913, had only set up the two black divisions to placate Negro leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois, who had been loudly demanding fairer treatment of black soldiers. Wilson and the military hierarchy, led by U.S. Commanding General John Pershing, had no real desire to see black officers assert themselves as leaders, and had no confidence that they could. In truth, the military establishment feared the impact on post-war U.S. civil society of returning black soldiers empowered by wartime leadership. They worried about liberated attitudes that might be brought back to the States by black men who they referred to as French women ruined Negroes. The 92nd's top general, Charles Ballou, was obsessed with the idea of sexual contact between black soldiers and white French women, and was constantly on the lookout for crimes of rape. One of the two colored units, the 93rd Infantry Division, never got to fight a single day with U.S. forces. General Pershing immediately dumped them onto the French as soon as they arrived in France. But it turned out to be a stroke of luck for the 93rd, as the French loved these dusky fighting men who proved themselves to be great warriors. They emerged at the end of the war as the most highly decorated of all U.S. units. Gordon and his fellow soldiers of the 92nd Division had a tougher time, as they were led by U.S. generals who complained about them and harassed them, constantly trying to undermine their credibility with a negative twist on all the stories coming from the front. These resentful senior officers were ready to sacrifice black officers and have the black divisions suffer defeat on the battlefield in order to put these uppity Negroes in their place. Despite these obstacles, the troops of the 92nd fought with distinction in all three of the division's major campaigns during the final year of the bloody 4-year war. In one critical mission, when Gordon and his lightly armed team of radio men found themselves pinned down by devastating enemy fire and had no infantry soldiers to protect them, they took the offensive themselves, charging and disabling the enemy forces and capturing many prisoners in deadly hand-to-hand combat. Time and time again, the Buffalo Soldiers distinguished themselves, even though they were often ill-supplied and poorly led by the senior command. As it turned out, the only troops who actually failed in their mission were 2 senior officers, neither of them black, who cracked under fire and were unable to lead their troops during the critical Argonne offensive. Sadly, their fellow senior officers tried to cover for them, whitewashing their failure by attempting to scapegoat several black officers who were charged with cowardice and dereliction of duty. The sudden and unexpected end of the war did not improve things for the Buffalo Soldiers. General Pershing refused to allow black troops to march in the Paris Victory Parade, even though the French proudly showcased their own black Algerian, Moroccan, and Senegalese troops in the celebration. And when they returned home in 1919, they faced a resurgence of racial animosity in the U.S. Lynching of blacks had increased from 58 in the year 1918 to 77 in 1919, the year black soldiers began to return to the States. Many of those lynched were black soldiers in uniform. James Weldon Johnson referred to the return of the American black soldiers as the bloody summer of 1919. Like all returning soldiers in war, Gordon and other surviving Buffalo soldiers would pick up the pieces of their lives as best they could. But most were disappointed that their battles in President Wilson's war to make the world safe for democracy had not improved their lot at home. Gordon was unable to transition his passion for radio into peacetime work, as U.S. industry was not quite ready to accept men of color in engineering and technology fields. Undaunted, he went back to Howard and prepared himself for a career in dentistry. But the sacrifices of the black warriors was not in vain, as their efforts had opened new opportunities for soldiers of color and forever changed the face and soul of the U.S. military. 30 years after the end of the war, the Army would be completely desegregated, although none of the black heroes of World War I would live to see the day when U.S. armed forces and the entire nation would be led by men of color.